The Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary stretches 276 miles along the central coast and sits along one of the largest metropolitan areas in the United States. It's home to more than 525 species of fish, 36 species of marine mammals, more than 180 birds, and is one of the most diverse ocean biospheres in the world, covering more area than Yellowstone National Park. Home to endangered species like the blue whale and threatened green sea turtles, the sanctuary functions as a management system designed to steward research, protection, education, and sustainable recreation to ensure harmony with its many and varied inhabitants. But it wasn't always protected.
We remember that in 1969 there was a terrible oil spill off of Santa Barbara that really kind of awakened a lot of people to the threat.
I think the oil spill in Santa Barbara was one of the things that precipitated the first Earth Day the next year. The spill led to Earth Day, and the Earth Day led to organizing and lots of discussions and education. It was just a connection that went all the way through, and the spill really started that movement.
I mean, you have a national energy crisis under President Carter, and everybody wanted oil. So it was drill, baby, drill. And we weren't getting much attention from the federal government.
Well, the Monterey Bay, before it was protected, was endangered. We had a power plant that was doing once-through cooling. We had fishing that may not have been sustainable. We had proposals for offshore oil.
The people of the Monterey Bay area weren't new to standing up to protect their home. In fact, the area was threatened many times during the 1960s and 70s, and efforts to defeat nuclear power plants, oil ports, and oversized housing developments were built on coalitions of concerned citizens who would later band together to fight against offshore drilling.
One of my great friends was working in Washington, and he told me that the federal government was going to lease Northern California coastal waters for oil drilling. I said, that can't be possible.
Monterey Bay is special to me because this is my home. And I used to walk with my grandfather down to the wharf in Monterey. He really had a deep respect for our oceans because he had been a mariner at sea in the old sailing ships. He had fished, but he really appreciated the ocean.
The sanctuary is so special to me because I went to UC Santa Barbara, and I remember very clearly before we went into the dormitories, there was a sign and a bucket with turpentine and rags, and it said to please use this to clean the tar off the bottom of our feet before we walked into the dorms. And I remember walking along the beach and stepping over blobs of tar and oil, and it was on our hair, in our hair and on our clothing. And thinking, but for sanctuary status, we might be looking at oil derricks out here off of the Monterey coast. The Monterey Canyon, which is more than 2 miles deep, it's deeper than the Grand Canyon. And because of this canyon, it creates and it supports all of this biodiversity, all these ecosystems.
In 1985, I approached local environmentalists and said, I want to do a ballot measure that deals with offshore oil. And I always remember Kim Shantz, who was active in Save Our Shore, said, I don't want to support it unless there's teeth. We thought, we're city. But what teeth do you have when the federal government and the state government wants to drill offshore?
And we were able to get every city and county along the coast to adopt zoning laws. I don't even think the federal government even knows we still have those laws. They prevent offshore activities from having their stations on shore.
And the important thing is, we added a provision that said you could spend city money to educate other cities and counties on how they might consider the same thing. And that's what passed with over 80% of the vote. We then hired Save Our Shores, which was Dan Hafley, to implement this.
So I had the huge budget of $15,000 with which to compose a slideshow, send out a letter to every coastal city and county from San Luis Obispo north in California. Then I had to follow up, so I got in my little Ford Pinto and I drove all over the coastline. I slept on people's couches. I spent my time in the car, giving slideshow presentations, talking to community groups, talking to elected officials.
Eventually, we ended up with 26. Well, the one constitutional thing that cities and counties are granted is the right to zone. If we say we won't have a zoning change for onshore support facilities without a vote of the people, it's not a ban. It was genius.
And because of that, we were able to show in Washington that California was truly unified in opposing offshore drilling.
The ocean can do lots of things, and the life in it can do lots of things. The one thing it can't do is it can't speak for itself. This is about protecting the coast and ocean for the life that lives in it and the life it gives us.
Teams of marine biologists, photographers, politicians, and volunteers spent years studying the ecosystem of the ocean between the Golden Gate and San Luis Obispo County to determine that this area was actually one interconnected biosphere.
Scientific information was gathered to show that the largest possible boundary for the sanctuary was one continuous ecosystem that deserved protections under the National Marine Sanctuaries Act.
But those efforts alone were not enough. Many stars would be needed to align to get federal sanctuary designation.
Interesting politics is that George Bush, who was running for president, was told by Pete Wilson, who was the United States Senator, that if you endorse the big one, you'll get a lot of environmental votes in California.
We had kind of deliberately set this up so that the establishment of the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary would be incorporated in what was called the CR, Continuing Resolution, which required the funding of the federal government.
Was it the standing army of volunteers steadily growing, coastal town by coastal town? Or the incumbent president looking to gain new territory for votes? Or a shrewd politician with a budgetary Trojan horse filled with marine protections? It was all of this and more. It took an incredible effort by those who chose to spend their lives fighting for the sanctuary to be a place of refuge and safety for its inhabitants. And like most miracles, it took a precise chain of events happening at the exact right time to keep the Monterey Bay Sanctuary how it is today.
I got a call from somebody at the White House who was a friend, who basically said, the president just signed the bill. At that point I said, it's a done deal.
I was relieved. I was absolutely relieved and exhausted.
It was a great relief that we had beaten the oil companies.
I was excited, but I was incredulous. We pushed for the widest possible boundary, thinking that that's what we do for a negotiating position. And then when they took the widest possible boundary, we tried to keep from acting surprised in public.
The establishment of the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary 30 years ago created an explosion of activity at the local and state level to build upon the establishment of the sanctuary, to be able to get marine protected areas, to be able to get the California Ocean Science Trust, to be able to get all kinds of other activities which have had a profound effect in a positive way on our coast and ocean.
One piece of knowledge that we need to grab onto is to listen to indigenous voices. We have marine sanctuary status from Point Arena down to the Channel Islands, except for the area where the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary would be, and we need that.
Our goal is to reverse the 100 years of damage and pollution, offshore oil, and contamination to our ocean and our communities.
I'm a member of the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary Advisory Council. My biggest accomplishment is not done. This is not a green planet, this is not a brown planet, this is a blue planet. The ocean is our answer, and it's our mother. It provides us with every other breath we take.
The future of our ocean will depend on the voices and participation of every beachgoer, fisherman, surfer, and every resident, near and far. and the ocean calls for people of all colors, religions, backgrounds, and genders to help foster the health and conservation of our most valuable sustainer of life.